Hello again, welcome back. So I am going to read the next chapter in the Boxcar Children, but before I do, I have a joke. So you've heard of the joke, how do you make a tissue dance? Put a little boogie in it. Okay, have you heard this one? What did one boogie say to the other? You think you're funny, but you're snot. So, okay, this chapter is called Benny Discovered His Beloved Pink Cup. And I'm just going to remind you, so Benny's in the red, and then Jesse's the oldest, and then Violet is this one. And remember, we left off where they were at a junkyard. Henry went into town to try to find work, and they went to the junkyard. Well, they went through the woods and found a junkyard, but they found all these bowls and cups and things and spoons that they could use. So this is a short chapter, so I'm going to read two. So Benny discovered his beloved pink cup. Can you imagine the dishwashing when the happy party returned to the freight car? Children do not usually care for dishwashing, but never did a little boy hand dishes to his sister so carefully as Benny did. On their hands and knees beside the clear, cool little wash tub, because they didn't really have a wash tub, the three children soaped and rinsed and dried their precious store of dishes. Jess scoured the rust from the spoons with sand. There, she said, drying the last polished spoon. The children sat back and looked admiringly at their own handiwork, but they did not look long. There was so much to be done. Jess, exclaimed Violet, I'll tell you. Violet seldom spoke so excitedly. Even Benny turned around and looked at her. Come and see what I noticed inside the car last night. And when they say car, they're talking about the boxcar. Both children followed her and peered in at the door. See? On the wall, right over on the other door, Jess. Now all Jess could see were two thick chunks of wood nailed securely to the closed door opposite the open one. But she whirled around and around as fast as she could, clapping her hands together. When she could get her breath, however, she skipped over to the board they had carried, dusted it nicely, and laid it carefully across the two wooden projections. It made a perfect shelf. There, said Jess. The children could hardly wait to arrange the shining new dishes on the shelf. Violet quietly gathered some feathery white flowers, a daisy or two, and a maiden-haired fern, which she arranged in a glass vase filled with water from the well. This she put in the middle with the broken edge hidden. There, said Jess. You said there 3 times, Jessie, remarked Benny contentedly. So I did, replied Jess, laughing. But I'm going to say it again. She pointed and said, there. Henry was coming up the path. So let's find out. This chapter is called Earning a Living. And remember, he's the oldest. He's 14. So he was going to go into town and look for a job so they would have food. Henry had all sorts of packages under his arm and in his pockets, but he wouldn't open them or tell a thing about his adventures until dinner was ready. He said, Jess, you're a wonder, when he saw the dishes on the shelf. The big kettle was selected, and they all began to pick blueberries as fast as they could, telling Henry meanwhile all about the wonderful dump. At last the tablecloth was spread, and Henry unwrapped his parcels before the whole family. I bought some more brown bread, he said, producing the loaves, and some more milk, in the same little store where I went yesterday. It's kept by a little old man, and it's called a delicatessen shop. He has everything in his store to eat. I bought some dried beef because we can eat it with our fingers. And I bought a big bone for the dog. His name is Watch, Jess interrupted. Oh, all right, said Henry, accepting the name. I bought a bone for Watch. Watch fell on the bone as if he were famished, which indeed he nearly was. It was a rapturous moment when Jess poured the yellow milk into 4 cups of bowls, and each child proceeded to crumble the brown bread into it with liberal scatterings of blueberries. And then when they ate it with spoons, nobody was able to speak a word for several minutes. Then Henry began slowly to tell his tale. I earned $1 just this morning, he began proudly. I walked along the first shady street I came to. Nice houses, you know, and there was a fellow out mowing his own lawn. He's a nice fellow, too, I can tell you. A young doctor. Henry paused to chew blissfully. He was pretty hot, Henry went on, and just as I came to the gate, his telephone rang. I heard it and called after him and asked if he didn't want me to finish up. And he said he did, cried Jess. Yes, he said, for goodness sake, yes, Henry answered, smiling. You see, he wasn't used to it, so I mowed the lawn and trimmed the edges, and he said he had never seen a boy trim it as well as I did. And then he asked me if I wanted a steady job. "Oh, Henry," cried Violet and Jess together. I told him I did, so he said to come back this afternoon, anytime I wanted, or tomorrow. He said he didn't care just when, any time. Henry gave his cup a last polish with his spoon and sat it down dreamily. "It's a pretty house," he went on, "and there's a big garden behind it, vegetable garden, and an orchard behind that, cherry orchard. You ought to see the cherry trees. Well, when I was trimming the edges near the kitchen door, the cook came and watched me. She's an old Irish woman," Henry laughed at the recollection. "She asked me if I liked cookies. Oh, if you had smelled them baking, you'd have died laughing, Benny. Delicious! So I said I did, and she passed me one. And when she went back, I put it in my pocket." "Did she see you?" asked Jess anxiously. "Oh, no," Henry said confidently, "for I carefully chewed for a long time on nothing at all." Benny began, and I'm guessing that he put the cookie in his pocket because he wants to save it for his brothers and sisters. Benny began to look fixedly at Henry's pocket. It certainly still was rather bulgy. "When I went, the doctor paid me $1, and the cook gave me this bag." Henry grinned as he tossed the paper bag to Jess. Inside were 12 ginger cookies with scalloped edges, smelling faintly of cinnamon and sugar. "I'm going to keep track of everything I earn and spend," said Henry, watching Jess as she handed around the cookies with reverence. "Well, how are you going to write without a pencil?" asked Jess. "Well, there are pieces of Taylor's chalk in my work bag," said Violet. Henry gave his younger sister a gentle pat as she returned with her work bag and fished inside for the chalk. While the girls rinsed the empty dishes in the brook and stored away the food for supper, Henry was beginning his cash account on the wall of his bedroom. It was never erased, and Henry often now looks at the account with great affection. Soon the girls came to inspect it. Meanwhile, Benny looked on with great delight as Watch tried to bury his bone with only one paw to dig with. "Earned $1. Cash on hand $3.85, read Jess aloud. Below, Henry had written, milk 24 cents, bread 10 cents, bread 20 cents. Remember, he bought bread twice now. Cheese 10 cents, milk 24 cents, beef 20 cents. And here's a little list, I don't know if you can see, of how he's keeping track of everything he spends. And that is the end of that. Oh, nope. Sorry. Again, still getting used to the Kindle. Sorry, guys. Oh my goodness. Trying to get to where I left off. So Kindles are not like books, and you have to do a lot of this to get there, and I don't use them very often. Oh, okay, so the next page after this, 2 more things. A bone cost 5 cents, and cloth cost 10 cents. "Cloth!" exclaimed Violet. "What on earth?" Henry laughed a little and watched her face as he drew out his last package and handed it to her. "I thought we ought to have a tablecloth," he explained, "so I got a yard at the 10-cent store, but it isn't hemmed, of course." With a cry of delight, Violet unwrapped the brown cloth with its edge of blue. Her clever fingers were already evening the 2 ends. She was never so happy as when with a needle. Henry sat off again with a light heart. Here was one sister curled up happily against a big tree, setting tiny stitches into a very straight hem. Here was another sister busily gathering pliant twigs into a bundle for a broom with which to sweep the stray pine needles from the house. And here was Benny, curled up sound asleep on the ground with the dog for a pillow. It was quite late when Henry returned. In fact, it was nearly 7 o'clock, although he didn't know that. Several treasures had been added in his absence. The broom stood proudly in the corner with a slim stick for a handle. The new tablecloth had been washed and was drying on the line, and Jess, who had decided to wash 1 garment a day, had begun with Benny's stockings. When Henry came, they were being put on again with much pride by Benny himself. Violet had darned a big hole in each. And when someone says they darned a hole, that means they've sewn up a hole or they fixed it. This time, Henry himself could not wait to tell his sisters what he had. He passed them the package at once with shining eyes. "Butter!" cried Jess with a radiant face. It was butter, cool and sweet. Nobody remembered that they had been a week without tasting either butter or meat when at last they sat down to their royal supper. "These are trick spoons," explained Henry. "Turn them upside down and use the handle, and they become knives." They were knives anyway. They were used to spread the delicious morsels of butter on the brown loaf, with dried beef and a cookie for dessert. Who could ask for better fare? Certainly not the 4 children, who enjoyed it more than the rarest dainties. "I washed the doctor's automobile this afternoon," Henry related. "Then I washed both piazzas with the hose, and tomorrow I'm going to hoe in the garden. Oh, wouldn't I love to have a nice cold swim in that brook." Henry was hot and sticky, certainly. He looked with longing eyes at the waterfall as he finished the last crumbs of his supper. "I wonder if we couldn't fix up a regular swimming pool," he said, half to himself. "Of course we could," replied Violet, as if nothing were too difficult. "Jess and I know where there are big logs and big flat stones." "You do, eh?" said Henry, staring at his gentle little sister. "Well, why couldn't we, Henry?" struck in Jess. "Just a little below this. There is a sort of pool already, only not big enough." "We sure could try," cried Henry. "Someday I'll stay home from work and we'll see." Nobody realized that Henry had been working only one day in all. Anyway, it seemed as if they had always lived in the comfortable home in the freight car, with Henry plying back and forth from the city each day, bringing them new surprises. Henry went to bed that night with a head full of plans for damming up the brook. He almost shouted when he thought suddenly of Benny's wheels. He began to plan to make a cart to carry the heavy stones to the brook. And that was when he first noticed that Watch was not asleep. He could see his eyes shining red in the darkness. It must have been around 11 o'clock. Henry reached over and patted his rough little back. Watch licked the hand, but didn't close his eyes. Suddenly, he began to growl softly. "Shh," said Henry to the dog. Now, thoroughly startled, he sat up. Just sat up. They did not hear a sound. "Better shut the door," breathed Henry. Together they rolled the door very slowly and softly until it was shut. Still they did not hear anything, but still Watch continued his uneasy growling. Violet and Benny slumbered on. That means they continued sleeping. Jess and Henry sat motionless with their hearts in their mouths. "Supposing it was some other guy," whispered Jess. "Somebody else that wanted to sleep here." "Watch would bite him," whispered Henry briefly. Jess never knew what confidence Henry had in the faithful dog. Then a branch cracked sharply outside, and Watch barked out loud. Jess smothered the dog instantly in her arms, but it had been a bark, and it was loud, clear, and unmistakable. "That settles it," thought Henry. "Whoever it is knows there's someone in here." And the boy waited with the new broom in his hand, expecting every moment to see the door open from the outside. But nothing happened. Nothing at all. The children sat in perfect silence for at least a half hour, and nothing more was heard. Watch sniffed a little when Henry finally rolled the door open again, but he then turned around 3 times and lay down beside Jess, apparently satisfied at last. Taking the dog's conduct as a sure guide, Henry composed himself for sleep. "It must have been a rabbit or something," he said to Jess. The occupants of the freight train car slept peacefully until morning. Oh my goodness, so they're getting comfortable in their new home, the boxcar, but there's also things that happen at night that might be kind of scary for 4 kids that are living alone. Okay, the next chapter is called At Home, and you'll have to tune in to find out what that is all about.